All right, so I'm on 161, verse 4. Remember, they're analyzing the scene where the three angels come to visit Abraham. So, in that whole scene where they announce that Sarah's going to have a baby, and then they rescue Lot. It's actually an important scene in the Torah. We read it about 3 weeks ago. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Mikan tzadikim omrim ma'at v'osim harbe, Rishaim omrim harbe v'afilu ma'at einam osim. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar, so we know that righteous people say little but do a lot, whereas wicked people say a lot and do little. So we already had the example of a righteous person saying a little. Abraham said, I'll just give you a little bit of bread, and then he gives them a huge meal. So he promises little, but gives a lot. And now Minalan. So how do we know about wicked people that promise a lot but give little? Ephron. So Ephron is the guy who sold Abraham Ma'arat Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, as a burial ground. Ktiv. So it says for him, Eretz Arba Me'ot shekel kesef. So when Abraham first asks how much it costs, he says 400 shekels, but he also implies that you don't have to give me anything. Well, it's worth 400, but why should you give me anything? We're friends. But in the end, Ulevasov Ketiv, Vaishma Avraham el Ephron. Abraham listened to Ephron, Vaishkol Avraham el Ephron et kesef. And Abraham gave him the money. Asher diber bozne b'nei chet. What he said, Arba me'ot shekel over l'socher. 400 shekels according to the local exchange rate. Now the rabbis with a little just midrash. Delo shakil min ela kantare. There's a midrash that Ephron had switched the exchange rate, currencies. So suddenly Abraham had to pay approximately $1 million times more. Then I guess Abraham could afford it. But what was 400 shekels became 4 million shekels, or 40 million shekels. The ikaduchte de karele la tikla kantere. So it was kind of a bait and switch. He said it'll be 400 shekels. In fact, he said, well, I meant according to this exchange rate, and you were thinking the other exchange rate. So Abraham ended up paying 40 million shekels instead of 400 shekels. But what's 40 million shekels among friends? So, so Abraham was very wealthy. I actually feel like part of the reason of this midrash, part of the reason of the midrash is to paint Ephron as a wicked person, to point this to create this example. I think also that they enjoy the fact that Abraham had a lot of money, and that Abraham was very wealthy. The Torah indicates that Abraham was wealthy, but this seems to indicate that he was super wealthy. So somehow they like that. I'm not sure. It's a weird midrash. All right, let's turn. We're continuing though this analysis. It's a midrashic analysis of this scene, an extended midrashic analysis, a little unusual for the Talmud, which generally sticks to kind of nuts and bolts Jewish law. But every once in a while you get pages of midrashic analysis, which could go in Midrash Rabbah, a collection of midrash, but it's in the Talmud. Much of this also is in Midrash Rabbah, which is the big collection of midrash. Anyway, Ketiv Kamach uKetiv Solet. So the three angels, we don't know they're angels yet, but the men come to Abraham, and he acts like a host. And so he goes and gets meat, right? Is going to kill somebody from the herd, but he also tells his wife to start cooking. Notice that's important also. He doesn't just tell his wife to start cooking. He takes care of the meat. He tells her to start cooking, but he confuses her because he says, I want you to go get kemach and solet. So kemach is meal and solet is fine flour. So sort of the difference between whole wheat flour and white flour. And white flour is the more luxurious. And Abraham says, in those days it is. In those days, white flour is what all the rich people ate. Nowadays it's different. We eat all the whole grain. Rich people eat whole grain. But then white flour, because it takes more labor. So white flour is considered the most luxurious flour. But Abraham says, he says to get two types of flour. So it's a typical man thing. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And Sarah can't figure out, what do you want me to do? What flour should I use? So, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Mikan, Sha'isha Sadra Inneha Borachim Yoter Minaish. So people will be offended by this. So we learned from this that women are, now Tzara Inneha, a Tsar Ayin, a narrow eye, means that you're less generous. So we learn from this that women are less generous than men when it comes to guests. So Abraham had said, use the fine flour, and she had heard use the less fine flour because women in general are less generous than men when it comes to gas. That's the Talmud. I didn't.
You don't have to explain it.
Right, I'm explaining. I'm not justifying it. It could be Rabbi Yitzchak's wife was like that, and he was. I think we all know counterexamples of this, but that's what they wanted to say. Abraham was in fact very generous, and Sarah may have been more prudent. Hey, we can't just give away all of our food to these people, or why should we waste? I mean, if you think about it, Abraham's really wasteful. He's giving each of them a full cow. There's no just so they can have the tongue. If you remember that from a couple of weeks ago. So I can tell you, my wife would never go along with that. that's wasting a huge amount of food, and that's also not good. All right, Ketiv. It says, "Lushi v'asi ugot." So knead it and make bread. Uketiv v'ikachema chalav uben bakar. All right. So in one it says make cakes, and the other now when they actually serving the meal, it's just butter, milk, and beef. V'ilu lechem lo aite lekamayu. But there's no bread. So he had told Sarah, cook bread, make bread, but they don't seem to serve bread. What's going on with that?
Beef is
what?
Pre-kosher, yes?
It's before the kashrut laws. Yeah, there's obviously some difficulty here why Abraham is serving non-kosher food, but that's the obvious answer, is that the laws of kashrut hadn't been given yet. Also, it's not clear that Abraham's eating with them. So anyway, Amar Ephraim Miksha'a. So Ephraim. This is if you want, you can look at the side notes. This guy, Ephraim Miksha'a, he gets 3 mentions in all of rabbinic literature, which is vast, of course. That's Talmud and Midrash. This is one of the 3. We don't exactly know what his word means, what his name means. It could be Abraham. It could be Ephraim from the city of Sha'a or Kasha, but we don't know anything about that city. But that's what it could mean. Or it could be he is very good at posing questions. Kushiot, Makshe. He's a Makshe. So anyway, maybe it's just his last name anyway. Difficult questions, right? Yeah. Right, exactly. Amar Ephraim Mikshat Talmido shel Rabbi Meir, who was a student of Rabbi Meir. Mishmei to Rabbi Meir. Now he's quoting Rabbi Meir. Avraham Avinu ochel chulin b'tahara haya. All right. This is a very interesting. Actually, it's deeper than it appears here. So Abraham would follow, even though the Torah hadn't been given. And that, of course, gets us into that problem of, well, why is he serving milk and meat together? But even though the Torah hadn't been given and the temple hadn't been built, Abraham conducted himself as if he was a high priest, which meant that he would only eat food in general when he was in a state of purity. Okay? And in fact, so what are the eating rules of the high priest are, you can only eat high priest food, truma. You can only eat special food, truma, and you always have to be in a state of purity in order to eat that food. However, a priest could eat non-truma food if he was not in a state of purity. So that's because there are times when you're in a state of non-purity. For instance, there's more specific things. It's if you're in the room with a dead body, or if your wife is menstruating and she's feeding you the food.
You're contaminated.
Yeah, well, so contaminated is a harsh word, but you're in a state of impurity. Right. Okay, so Abraham would take upon the eating rituals of a high priest, but he would even go further. So even if it was not truma, now of course they couldn't have had truma in those days. Truma is the tithing. Right. The community of Israel would separate 1/10 of their produce, give it to the priests, and that was tithe. Now of course there couldn't be truma food in those days, because there's only one Jew, right? There's only Abraham. There's nobody that could be tithing food for them to be eating. So all the food they would eat would be non-tithe food. But so let's say he came up with some way of having truma, of having tithe food. But he would be even more holy than the high priest. It's interesting that they thought of him as taking on all of the restrictions of being a high priest, because it means they thought of Abraham as being a high priest before the Torah was given, before the temple was even built, before there was any need for a priest, which shows that they thought of Abraham as being the exemplar of the Jewish religious leader. He was the king, he was the priest, he was the rabbi, he was all these things. All right, anyhow. So he would olchim chulin b'ta'arahaya. He would only eat non-priestly food if he was in a state of purity. And now, Visara imenu, and Sarah, our mother at that point, oto hayom, that day, persanida. She was menstruating that day. So if she was menstruating that day, and she was making the food, it would be fine for everybody to eat. In fact, it would be fine even for priests to eat because it's not truma, it's not sacred food. But Abraham has these restrictions, so he wouldn't eat anything that Sarah would prepare that day. So all this is to say that
He was observing that ritual.
he was observing that ritual. Now, does that answer why they didn't serve bread? Yes. Well, in some ways it does. Well, because he also decided, for my guests, I won't force them to eat this food, because maybe they're also high priests.
The men did the cooking a few days every month?
The men cooked the meat, and Sarah cooked the bread. That seems to have been what happened. So I don't know if we could say.
She can't serve it. She can cook it, but she can't serve it.
Well, we're going to get to that. The fact that she cooked it while she was in menstruation means that high priests wouldn't have been able to eat the food. Now, there's only one high priest, and it's unlikely the visitors would have been high priests, so it's not an inhospitable thing to do. But Abraham decides to take on that extra restriction of being a high priest. Yeah.
It's a logical fallacy.
Yeah, well, it's more than one. Yeah, well, you'll point out one.
With
Yeah.
these three men, they're
Yeah.
told you'll have a son next year, which means Sarah's 89, and you know from her response she doesn't menstruate at this
Yeah.
point. So this is no Bible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it says in black and white here she's menstruating. So
In
yeah,
the same
It's
section,
a
she's
miracle.
not. In fact, after she left, she didn't have a child.
I know. Well, we're going to look at that section.
Right.
Because they'll understand, of course, that there's a contradiction there. So the fact is they feel like she is menstruating. And I guess if you do the math, I mean, I think the thing is she's menstruating then. So then the prediction comes next year. It's not exactly a year from now. It doesn't say 1 year from now you're going to have a baby. It says next year. So the math could work because she's menstruating then a couple weeks later, they have relations, and then she gets pregnant. So, all right. Anyway, we're going to keep going. Vayamru elav. So they said to him, this is the visitors say to Abraham, Aye Sarah ishtacha. Where is Sarah? Vayomer hine va'ohel. And they say that she's in the tent. Why would she be in the tent unless she was menstruating? That's their proof that she was menstruating because she's in the tent. Okay. Lohodia shesara imeno tsnuya haita. So another thing is teaching us that she was modest. Page 163. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Itema Rabbi Yitzchak. Some say Rabbi Yitzchak. Yodim hayu malachei hasharet shesara imenu ba'ohel haita. Now they knew that she was in her tent. Elamai va'ohel. So what does the word in the tent mean? What does it mean? Kedei lechabeva al ba'ala. To endear her to her husband. In other words, to point out to her husband, because sometimes husbands can take their wives for granted, or spouses can take each other for granted, to point out to Abraham what a modest woman she was, and make her even more dear in Abraham's eyes. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Amar, Kidei l'shager la kosha bracha, because they wanted her to be able to drink from they had a kind of kiddush, a l'chaim, before the meal, and they wanted her to participate in that. So they say, where's your wife? So they can send her even though she's not eating with them, we'd like her to participate in drinking the ceremonial cup. Okay. I mean, you do learn interesting things about the separation of sexes in those days. Because probably the rabbis were reflecting on their own times and, women cooking, serving, things like that. But although, keep in mind, don't take it too literally because we're dealing with Midrash here. And they're looking probably at their own folklore to figure out maybe back then what people did. So, yeah.
As a practical matter, they've been exposed to environments in which the various places that they've gone have seized upon the women and taken them. So they don't know who these strangers are necessarily, and that could be, he could be fearful, and she could be fearful of not appearing in public before these three men.
Right.
So
Right. So these may be customs of modesty that, maybe the woman didn't serve. I mean, probably some of us here have grandmothers, like great-grandmothers, that would cook and not serve. That it's interesting. It's a custom in Ashkenazi households sometimes that the woman doesn't eat with. Yeah, she cooks and serves, but doesn't eat with the family. It's just I think I remember my grandmother telling me about that. Not doing it herself, but telling me that she remembered. Yeah. So okay. Tane Meshum Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi says, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Lama Nakud al. Now it's 3 letters there: Aleph, Yud, and Vav. Shibba Elav, because they say Vayumru Elav. They said to him in the Torah text itself. There's dots above the words Aleph, Yud, and Vav. Okay. Now you can look at Steinsaltz where he explains that occasionally in the Torah text itself you have these odd dashes and dots that don't seem to indicate anything. You don't know what they indicate, and we don't really know what they mean other than they're indicating something. The scribe is saying that something is I mean, I can even look at well, probably not that. It's probably that there's some kind of misspelling in the word that the scribe is unsure about, but the tradition is to spell it that way. So they'll put little dots there to indicate that it's not a misspelling. Don't blame me, the scribe. This is how So that's generally what those things are about. Anyhow, you have in that particular instance above the Aleph, Yud, and Vav. I'll just finish this. Limdat Torah derech eretz. And for the rabbis, of course, it's always an opportunity for more midrash because they're always going to take those little dots and say they're telling us something. In fact, there's a famous midrash where Rabbi Akiva understood the meaning of all the crowns and all the dots and dashes that we don't understand. So now what they're saying is Limdat Torah derech eretz. The Torah is teaching us derech eretz is a way of acting, manners, good manners, right? Shish al adam ba'achsanya shelo, that you should always ask after the welfare of your host. So they asked after Sarah. They said, "Where's Sarah?" In that sense, they're saying, "How's Sarah? How's your wife?" But they didn't ask Abraham. So this is saying, well, those dots on the word ayo, and this is actually a very clever play on words, because the asking after Sarah is aye, aleph yud hey.
Right.
If they were going to ask after Abraham, they would say ayo. So the rabbis are saying the dots over those words, those letters, spell out aleph yud vav. So although the Torah doesn't tell us explicitly that they asked after Abraham's welfare, if you can read in between the lines like we can, you see that they did ask after Abraham's welfare, which is just when you go and you're eating at somebody's house, you should always say, "How are you? How are you doing?" That's the derech eretz. Okay, can we go on? Yeah, okay. The Ha'amar Shmuel, Ein sho'alim bishlom isha klal. But Shmuel said, you should never ask after a woman's welfare. You should never ask, "How are you doing?" to a woman, because that would be a breach of modesty. I mean, that would be a kind of, that's an intimacy. There's an intimacy there that you shouldn't presume that you can have with a woman, particularly a married woman. So Shmuel is actually saying they shouldn't have asked about Sarah because that's an intimacy they shouldn't be sharing with Sarah. And you can do it with a man. And how are you doing? It's because it's not a presumed intimacy. But for a woman, it's saying, and the modesty, and they must be reflecting, Shmuel must be reflecting the mores of his time and his culture, that you didn't do that with women. You didn't ask, "How are you?" Now the answer is al yedei ba'ala shani, but you can do it through the husband. So you can ask the husband, "How is your wife?" You can't speak directly to the wife and say, "How are you?" At least that's what Shmuel says. Okay. All right, we're going to go on. All right, so now we're going to get to the part where, and this is actually a very, very famous section. This is where, so the angel God, we talked about this last time. The three men morph into God and then become angels, then become men. It's very unclear what type of creatures they are. But in any case, they announce to Sarah that she's going to have a baby. And if you remember, her very famous response is that she laughs, which is where you get the word Yitzchak. Yeah, she laughs. And so we're going to read that now. So, and this is the quote. And we're going to have to, go ahead.
Before the quote, they just skipped the verse that nullifies verse 11, which I'm not going to address.
Okay, so go ahead.
It says, "Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advancing years. Sarah had stopped having the period."
Yes, right, yeah. No, so
that's very clear.
No. So clearly there's a miracle. Yeah, there's no question that this is miraculous. Them showing up creates the menstruation. So they're not saying that this is normal.
Also, she menstruated that day when they arrived.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I also want to say it's not so far from the pshat, because I think the indication of the text is that it's miraculous. It can't possibly happen. 90-year-olds, even in those days, and Abraham lives to be 107, I forgot, 170 something. But even in those days, and Sarah is 137 when she dies, but even then, if you were 90, you didn't have a baby. So I think they're indicating it was a tremendous miracle, which of course would say that that Isaac's birth is a miracle too. And that's a theme in the Torah, is miraculous births. All right, anyway. But they do have to twist out of, because of what you talked about in a second, they do have to twist now a bit what Sarah says. Because if she was in fact menstruating that day, she would know that she's menstruating. She says she wouldn't complain, hey, I'm not menstruating, so it's not possible, right? Yeah. So anyway, so she says, this is what she says, acharei veloti. And these words are not so easy to translate. So veloti means something like, there's too many years. I've dried up. You have the word bala on this. So I've dried up. Haitali edna. Would I have, now edna, and you see the word edna, aleph, ayin, daled, nun, hey. You see the word Eden in there, which means the Garden of Eden, which becomes a word for pleasure. So should I have pleasure? She seems to be saying, after I've dried up, and she's referring to moisture here, and which I think would include menstruation, is it possible for me to have pleasure? That seems to be the pshat. That seems to be what it's saying, meaning, we can't even have sex. So how could I possibly have a child? It's not, and she's referring to sex as pleasure. That's important also too. All right, but now the rabbis are going to analyze this. Amar Rav Chista, achar shnit balaha basar. So the flesh dries up. V'rabua kmatim. So now there's all sorts of wrinkles. Nit aden habasar. Okay. Now what's happened suddenly? This is the miracle. Now they translate nit aden, not so much as pleasure, but moisture. So moisture happens. Nit aden habasar. V'nit pashtu. So the flesh gets moist and unwrinkles. I can't think of a word for unwrinkles, but unwrinkles. V'nit pashtu, spread out hakmatim. There are no more wrinkles. V'chazara yofi limkomo. So as she's saying it now, so they translate this as acharei veloti. So the pshat is this. The pshat is she's saying to them, hey, I'm so dried up. Am I supposed to enjoy sex with my husband? They're reading it like this, which, by the way, you can read it that way. They're reading it as after I've dried up, now, suddenly, she's saying now, she's noticing in her own body, suddenly I've become rejuvenated. Suddenly, so she's not saying it as a question, she's saying it exclamation point. After I've been old, I've become rejuvenated. She even says, the chazar yofi limkomo, and my previous beauty has come back. So it's the fountain of youth. These three guys come, and there's the fountain of youth. Suddenly, I'm as beautiful as I ever was, and I don't have wrinkles. So it's like an exclamation. So she's not actually doubting in their reading of it. She's not saying this as I'm doubting what you're saying. She's saying, my gosh, that's amazing. Look what's happened to me. Yeah.
So another word, adin is also gentle. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Youthful.
The flesh should become gentle.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. K'tiv. Now, but she does have one objection. Va'adoni zaken. But my husband is too old. Yeah, so
in great shape.
Exactly. So I understand. So I could have a baby, but that guy can't be the father. I mean, have you looked at it? we can't. Look. It's happened to me. All right. So ukativ. Now this is the famous lie that God says. So when God reports the conversation to Abraham, God says, your wife Sarah says that you guys can't have a baby. Vaniza kanti. He only says that she's too old. But in fact, what she said was that Abraham is too old. Okay? So this is very famous because this gives the warrant to lie if you're going to spare somebody's feelings. Lie. Yeah. Mutar l'shanot. It's in Maimonides. Mutar l'shanot mipnei shalom. You're allowed to lie, to change things. A white lie for the sake of peace. This is the source for it. This right here in the Talmud. I'll read it. Delo motiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu kidam ra'ihi. God didn't want to say that what she had said. Tana debe Rabbi Ishmael. So we have a principle from the writings of Rabbi Ishmael. Gadol shalom. Peace, and this is referring to peace in the house. Shalom bayit. Is such a great principle. Shafilo HaKadosh Baruch Hu shinabo. That even God will lie to preserve to preserve peace in the home. And the word shina is not as strong a word as lishaker, which means to lie. So shina means more of a white lie. Now go try and define a white lie, because it's believe me, it's a slippery slope. What you think is a white lie for somebody else might be a tremendous untruth. And every political season, it's funny, we think that this is the first political season that we might have a candidate that might exaggerate something. So we have this like amnesia for we have this all the time. There's always some candidate that exaggerates a little bit, and we all go crazy. And then we all have to go back and think, well, what's a white lie? What's a as if people don't exaggerate about their life story. I'm not excusing anything. I'm just remembering that this always happens, and that and there's something in human nature that exaggerates or that tells white lies. And now the rabbis are groping because it's very hard. It's very hard to come up with solid principles about when you can lie, when you can't lie. And they find a nice example here, that God is sparing Abraham's feelings. He would feel very bad about himself, and the marriage would suffer if they found out what they said to each other. So God shina, the white lie. I would say, don't necessarily do this at home.
Yeah.
It's very, very, in my experience, it's very hard to come up with solid principles that are going to work throughout your life. Yeah. Here I can lie, here I can't.
But on the other hand, the angels could do for Abraham what they did for Sarah. Make him.
Yeah, they could. Yeah. Well, we're actually going to get to that too. Some really interesting teachings here. So we probably won't get to it today, but some really interesting teachings here about aging. So already you see what there was aging. She had these wrinkles and they dried up. But let's keep going. As it says, now she laughed and sighed. How could I have a baby? My husband is old. Ukativ Vayomer Adonai Avraham, and it says God says to Abraham, and when Abraham reports the conversation, he says she can't have a baby, Vaniza Kanti, because she's old. Okay. We'll read a little bit more. Almost done. The Tomer. Mimi Leila Avraham, Heinika Vanim Sarah. Okay, this is after she has the baby. She says, who would have told to Abraham that Sarah would be able to nurse children? So this is all the thing about moisture, no moisture in the body, and suddenly it's not that she has the baby, right? She's nursing the baby, so there's additional moisture coming from her breasts. Kama banim heinika Sarah. Okay, so we're going to stop here, but it's a very good question because Sarah says, who would have thought that Abraham would have a child, would have children? It's the plural there, and that I would be able to physically nurse children. And the question is, Kama banim heinika Sarah? How many children, in fact, did Sarah nurse? Because from what we understand, she only had one. She had Isaac. But now when she's talking about her ability to nurse, she's saying, I was able to nurse children. All right, so where do these other children come from? Interesting midrash. We'll do that next week.